The house had learnt to hold its breath. Amalie noticed it most in the mornings, in the narrow space between waking and standing. The floorboards did not creak then, the walls did not settle. Even the hearth stayed cold until spoken to. It was as though the house itself waited to see what sort of day it would be allowed to have. She lay still beside her brother and listened. From downstairs came the scrape of a chair, sharp and deliberate, the clink of a spoon against ceramic. Their stepmother always rose before the sun. Amalie did not know why, but she knew better than to ask. Amalie reached across the narrow pallet and rested her hand on Erik's shoulder. He was already awake. He typically was before daybreak. "Stay," she whispered, barely moving her lips. He nodded without looking at her, his eyes glazed over and glossy. They waited until the sounds below settled into something predictable. They listened to the measured footsteps, the cupboard opening, the cupboard closing. Quietly, Amalie sat up and pulled on her stockings, careful not to snag them on the splintered bed frame. She smoothed Erik's hair with her fingers the way their birth mother used to, once, long ago, when gentle mornings were not a distant memory. Downstairs, the table was already set. Their stepmother sat at its head, her back straight, her hair pinned tightly enough that it pulled her face into something permanently displeased. Before her lay a loaf of fresh bread, still steaming, a dish of butter, and a bowl of sliced meat. At her feet, the dog gnawed happily at a bone nearly as long as its leg. Amalie felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She guided Erik to their places and waited to be acknowledged. That was stepmother's rule, or rather one of many. They did not speak before stepmother, they did not eat until permitted, they did not ask questions. The stepmother did not glance toward the children at all as she sliced bread and buttered it generously. She tore a piece free and dropped it to the floor. The dog wagged its tail and devoured it with enthusiasm. Erik's stomach betrayed him with a soft, unmistakable sound. The knife paused. Their stepmother turned her gaze slowly, as if savouring the moment. "Hungry again?" she asked, her voice high and clear. Erik cowered back in his chair. Amalie's hand tightened protectively around his wrist beneath the table. "We fed you last night," stepmother continued. "Or have you already forgotten?" Amalie remembered. The children had been offered crusts of bread so hard it had scraped their gums raw. Even the water they drank had gone stale from standing too long. Amalie did not speak. She lowered her eyes and kept her face still. Their stepmother sighed and finally pushed a plate toward them. On it lay 2 crusts, cracked and dry. Debts must be paid, and mouths cost money. Erik reached for the plate too quickly. The sound that followed was loud and final. Amalie winced at the sharp crack of knuckles against wood as their stepmother struck his hand away. Erik cried out before he could stop himself. The chair scraped back. Amalie was on her feet without remembering standing, her heart pounding so hard it blurred her vision. "Please," she said. She did not know what she was pleading for any more. Mercy? She thought to herself. Their stepmother rose slowly. "Sit," she said. Amalie sat. The woman took Erik by the arm and dragged him from the chair. He did not fight. He never did. The strikes came quickly, calculated and cold. When it was over, Erik lay curled on the floor, silent but shaking. The dog lifted its head, tail thumping once against the ground, then returned to its bone. "Clean that up," their stepmother said, nodding toward Erik. "And be grateful. Others would have done worse." Amalie knelt and gathered her brother into her arms. He smelled like dust and old wool. His eyes shimmered with fear. Pressing her cheek to his hair, Amalie rocked him until the shaking slowed. She did not cry, knowing that crying only prolonged suffering. Days in their house were not marked by time, but by endurance. Amalie learned to complete chores without praise. Silence was rewarded with less attention. Patience was honed into something sharp and twisted. Amalie learned to anticipate stepmother's temperament the way others learn to predict weather. She learned which silences were dangerous and which were merely cold. She learned to count bread heels and hide crumbs in her pockets for Erik to find later. And when she could not protect him, she learned to stand still.
Chapter 2. Escape. It was hunger that finally broke them. It was not the slow, familiar ache in the pit of their stomach. No, this hunger was different. This hunger was the sharp, blinding kind that stripped away thought. It was the kind of hunger that made Erik reckless. It all started at supper. Their stepmother had guests that night. 2 women from the village filled the sterile house with perfume and laughter. The table groaned beneath roasted meat, potatoes glazed with butter, and thick slices of bread still warm enough to tear easily. Amalie kept her eyes on her lap. She knew better. Erik glanced between her and the dishes of food piled temptingly on the table. When their stepmother leaned in to refill a glass, Erik's hand darted forward. His fingers closed around a piece of bread. The sound of the slap echoed like a crack of thunder. Erik cried out as he was yanked from his chair. The guests fell silent. One of them laughed nervously, unsure of what to make of the situation. Their stepmother's face twisted, not with anger, but with something colder. "I feed thieves as they deserve," she said, and struck him again. Amalie moved without thinking. She stepped between them, her arms outstretched. "Enough," she said, her voice shaking but loud. Time seemed to still. Their stepmother stared at her, then smiled. "So," she said softly, "you found your voice." The punishment that followed was worse than any Amalie and Erik had ever known. That night, as Amalie cleaned blood from Erik's mouth with the corner of her sleeve, she understood something with perfect clarity. There would never be a day when this ended on its own. "We have to go," she whispered. Erik looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Where?" Amalie thought of the forest beyond the fields of countryside land. It would be dark, lawless, but alive. She thought of animals that ate when they were hungry and slept when they were tired. "Anywhere," she said. "Anywhere else." They packed in silence. There was not much to bring with them. Amalie wrapped up their few worldly possessions in a thin homespun blanket. Together they carried a loaf of stolen bread, a knife too dull to be useful, and lastly, Amalie's gold chain. The piece of jewellery was thin and delicate. It was her birth mother's last gift. When the house finally slept, they slipped out into the night. The air outside felt unreal, too open, too free. The moon hung low, glowing faintly over the path ahead. Amalie did not look back. She took her brother's small hand and rushed into the forest, where the trees swallowed them quickly. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots snared their feet. Every sound startled the children. Still, Amalie breathed easier with every step away from the house. They walked until their legs shook and the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. When they finally stopped, it was beneath a stand of trees thick enough to hide them from the sky. Erik curled against her, trembling. "Will she come after us?" he asked. Amalie closed her eyes. Not tonight. She did not know if that was true. She only knew they could not turn back. Chapter 3. The Springs. Morning came pale and uncertain. Erik woke first, his lips cracked, his voice hoarse. "I'm thirsty." Amalie's mouth felt dry too. She nodded and helped him to his feet. They followed the sound of water through the trees. Hope quickened their steps. The spring was clear and bright, and sunlight danced across its surface. Erik knelt eagerly. "No!" Amalie said, suddenly, sharply. She had not heard words, not exactly, but something in the rush of water turned out of place in her chest. The sound shaped itself into meaning. Whoever drinks from me will become a tiger. Her heart raced. Don't drink, she begged. Please. Erik frowned. You're imagining things. Please, she said again, gripping his sleeve. He hesitated, then stood. Fine, the next one. They walked on. The second spring lay deeper in the forest, its waters darker, slower. Again, Erik bent to drink. Amalie felt the warning like a scream behind her. Whoever drinks from me will become a wolf. No, she cried. No, Erik, listen to me. He looked at her then. He truly stared, seeing her fear, her shaking hands. He sighed. Very well, sister, he said, but I must drink at the next spring. The third spring was small, almost hidden. Erik moved faster than she could stop him. The words came too late. Whoever drinks from me will become a deer. Erik drank. The change was swift and terrible. His body folded and contorted, bones reshaping, skin turning to fur. Amalie screamed her brother's name as antlers split the air and hooves took the place of his hands. When it was over, a deer stood before her, eyes wide and somehow unmistakably human. Amalie fell to her knees. Erik, she whispered. The deer stepped forward, trembling. She took the gold chain from her pocket. Her fingers shook as she looped it carefully around his neck, fastening it loose enough not to bind, tight enough not to slip away. The chain caught the light, a thin line of warmth against his brown fur. Her hands continued to shake with the shock that settled over her. I'm here. I won't leave you. For a long while, Amalie did nothing but kneel, her arms wrapped tightly around her brother in deer form. She nestled her head firmly against his soft fur. His skin was warm beneath the fur. The forest did not rush her. Birds continued their quiet song above. The deer, her brother, stood before her, trembling from hoof to flank. His breath came fast, white at the edges though the morning was warm. When he tried to step closer, his legs tangled beneath him, and he stumbled, startled by his own body. Easy, Amalie said, though she did not know if he understood the word anymore. He made a sound then. It was not a word, not even a cry, but something raw and broken that cut through her chest. I know, she whispered. I know. The deer lowered his head, antlers brushing her shoulder. He leaned into her touch. They did not speak again that day. They walked until dusk, deeper into the forest than Amalie had ever gone. When her legs threatened to give out, she followed a narrow animal path that led to a clearing where a small, abandoned hunting hut sagged beneath the trees. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, the door hanging crooked on its hinges, the hearth cold and choked with ash. Still, it was shelter. Amalie swept the floor with pine branches and cleared space near the fire. She gathered moss and leaves, making a bed in the corner for Erik to rest. He lay where she guided him, exhausted, eyes never leaving her face. When night fell, she sat awake and listened to the forest breathe. She wondered then if grief would finally demand its due. Instead, something resolute settled into her bones. This is how we must live, she thought. They had survived worse, she thought. Chapter 4. Stepmother's Promise. Amalie did not know how many days had gone by before their stepmother came, but it had not been long enough. Returning from the stream with water cupped in her hands, Amalie turned her head when suddenly the air shifted. The forest grew too still. Even the deer lifted his head, ears twitching. Footsteps approached. They were measured and familiar. The woman stepped into the clearing as though she owned it. She wore her best cloak, dark and heavy. The hem was untouched by mud, and her hair was pinned as neatly as ever. She smiled when she saw the deer. "Well," she said, "I suppose you've seen what happens when you don't heed what you've been told." Amalie swallowed. Her throat felt dry and heat burned behind her eyes. She set the water down in a basin and stood. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do this?" The stepmother tilted her head. "You ran," she said mildly. "You stole from me. You thought you could escape your punishment." Erik stamped the ground, lowering his head. The woman laughed softly. "Careful," she said. "He bites now." Amalie stepped in front of him. "Turn him back." Their stepmother sighed, as if disappointed. "Oh, child," she said, "if it were that simple, where would the lesson be?" She fiddled with her cloak, circling around Amalie and her brother. "I can undo the enchantment," she said. "No more antlers, no more hooves." Amalie's breath halted. She did not blink, staring intensely at her stepmother. "But," the woman continued, "debts must be repaid." She listed their sins as though reading from a ledger. Years of food, years of shelter, years of care. Each kindness had been twisted into obligation. "You will serve," her stepmother said, "and when the debt is paid, truly paid, I will remove the enchantment." "And if I refuse?" Amalie asked. The stepmother's gaze slid to the deer. "Then he remains as he is, or worse." The woman laughed, cruel and rich. "I don't care either way." Amalie bowed her head. "I see," she said quietly. "I will do what you ask." The stepmother smiled.
Chapter 5. Duty. Life settled into pattern as days stretched to years, and the time with her brother before he became a deer turned to faint memory. By day, Amalie rose before dawn and returned to the house that was not safe. She scrubbed floors already clean and when to go still. By night, she returned to the forest. The deer waited for her always. At first, he followed her everywhere, perhaps afraid she would vanish the way their mother had. Over time, he learned the boundaries of the clearing. He learned the rhythm of her steps, the sound of her breath. Amalie, too, learned the language of his body. She memorized the fearful flick of his ear, the way his hooves stomped angrily, or how he pressed his head against her chest at night in a way that felt closer to something like sorrow. They survived through the seasons. In spring, the forest bloomed wild and unrestrained. Flowers pushed through decay, indifferent to suffering. Amalie gathered herbs for sickness and hunger. Each summer, Erik grew stronger. His antlers thickened, branching wide and proud. He ran then, fast and free, returning always to her side. In autumn, the forest quieted. Leaves fell like slow fire. Amalie dried what food she could, storing it carefully, using every scrap. In winter, the cold crept into their bones. Amalie wrapped Erik in old blankets and slept beside him, her breath warming his flank. She had grown accustomed to the years passing this way. As Erik grew tall and strong, Amalie aged too. No longer did they resemble the small children they once had been. Even though Erik had grown, Amalie could not help the twinge of pain she felt, witnessing her brother trapped between man and beast. Sometimes in the deep of night, he would cry out. It was feral and yet too human to be animal. Amalie would wake and hold his head, whispering stories of who he had been, just as she would about mother or father. "You were kind," she would say. "You laughed easily. You loved the sound of rain." The deer would listen, still as stone. Chapter 6. The Horns. One fateful day, something broke the spell of quiet in the woods. Amalie heard it first. It rang out. There was a distant call, sharp and clear, cutting through the trees. Erik froze. She knew that sound, and she had heard it before.
It was long ago, carried faintly on the wind when travellers passed near the forest edge. But it had never come this close. It certainly never came with such intent. The sound came again, closer this time. Dogs barked, men shouted. The deer lifted his head at once, muscles tightening beneath his hide, ears twitching toward the sound that did not belong. "Erik," she whispered, already rising to her feet. He stamped once, hard, the earth cracking beneath his hooves. His breath came fast, white in the cool air. The gold chain at his neck caught the thin winter light and flashed. It was the horn. It sounded many times, layered upon itself, as though the forest were calling out in fragments. They were sharp, metallic cries that split the quiet into trembling pieces. Birds fled upward in dark flurries. The horns sounded again, closer. "Hunters," Amalie whispered to herself. She looked at her brother. Erik panicked. Amalie's heart beat painfully against her ribs. She reached for him, fingers brushing the coarse fur at his shoulder, and felt the tremor there. He was no longer the frightened boy who had once cried in the night from hunger, no longer the thin child she had carried on her back through the woods. The years had made him strong. He was too strong to hide easily, and too strong to go unnoticed. "Run. You must run." His dark eyes met hers. There was fear there, but also reluctance. He shook his head once, a sharp motion, as though to say, "No." Amalie swallowed hard. "I will find you," she said, forcing the words through the ache in her throat. "I always do." Another horn cut the air. This one was answered by voices. Men were shouting to one another, and dogs bayed in excitement. Branches snapped. The hunt was moving fast. Erik hesitated only a moment longer. Then he turned, hooves striking the earth in a blur of motion, and fled deeper into the forest. He bolted, crashing through brush, far away from the trembling ground. Amalie stood rooted where she was, long after he disappeared from sight, her hands clenched at her sides, listening as the sound of pursuit rushed past her like a storm that chose not to strike. Her vision blurred around her. The horns sounded once more. After that, the forest fell silent before Amalie sank to her knees, the world spinning beneath her.
Chapter 7. The Gold Chain. The party had assembled at dawn as planned. Men decorated themselves with polished spears, followed by dogs trained to obey. They sat atop horses restless with the scent of frost and leaves. Yet the king had felt the weight of the morning settle upon him in an unfamiliar way. The forest lay ahead, and he found himself uneasy beneath its gaze. "Shall we proceed, Your Majesty?" one of the huntsmen asked. The king hesitated. He had hunted all his life, but there was something that juxtaposed the stillness of that morning. The deer burst into the clearing as though flung there by fate itself. He was large, powerful. His coat was a deep, living brown. The deer did not stumble or panic at their approach. Instead, he ran with intention, with a strange awareness. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met the king's across the clearing. They were not the eyes of a beast. The king lifted his hand. The hunters slowed at his signal, uncertain of the hold. The dogs faltered. They too were confused by the sudden halt. During that pause, the deer did not flee immediately. It stood, sides heaving, watching the king with a gaze that was too steady, too knowing. Then the king saw the chain. It was gold, thin and unmistakable. It caught in the light, shimmering against the animal's neck. "Lower your weapons," he said quietly. The command carried. The deer stepped back once, then twice,
never breaking eye contact. When it finally turned and vanished into the trees, the king blinked in bewilderment. "Your Majesty," one of the men began. The king did not answer. He stared at the place where the deer had stood, his thoughts racing. He had seen many strange things in his young life, but never this. Never had he envisioned a creature marked so deliberately, so lovingly. "Call off the hunt," he said at last. The men hesitated, but they obeyed. "Stay back," he commanded, dismounting his horse. He did not wait for a reply. Once his feet landed on the firm ground, the king shifted to his wolf form, his bones reoriented, shaping gracefully into the image of a large grey wolf. Then, without any consultation from his men, the Alpha King followed the deer further into the forest. He did so out of a quiet pull he could not name. Perhaps it could be, just maybe, he thought to himself, without finishing the sentence. The deer moved with purpose, not fear, weaving through the forest. Somehow, the king felt that the deer knew precisely where it was going. He was never too close to the deer, and never too far behind. His wolf features were strong, but quick and stealthy. The gold chain at the deer's throat caught the light whenever the canopy of trees allowed for a ray of light to shine through. It was like a beacon shining in that dark forest, calling out to the king.
When the deer finally slowed, the king found himself stopping in his place. He remained there, quietly in his wolf form, watching as part of the forest. The path opened into a shallow hollow, cupped like a waiting hand. Frost clung to the edges of leaves. The air was very still. There, at the hollow's centre, knelt a young maiden. She was on her knees, bent forward with an arm wrapped around herself. Her face was downcast, and her shoulders shook, though no sound reached him. One hand pressed flat to the ground, her fingers splayed, as if the earth were the only thing holding her upright. The king did not move. He waited, watching patiently. The deer slowed to a walk, approaching her carefully. This was no longer the creature of flight the king had seen moments before. Its steps were measured, gentle. In fact, the movement was graceful. When the deer reached the maiden, it lowered its great head and pressed its brow against her shoulder. She gasped, letting out a cry that sounded of something like relief and joy, tinged with pain. The young woman turned at once, her hands coming up, reaching for the deer. She wrapped her arms around his long neck, burying her face against his fur with another sound, bittersweet and gentle. "Oh," she cried. "Oh, thank you, heavens!" She clung to him. Her relief was not dramatic but devastating in its quiet. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightened in the chain at his neck, trembling. The deer stood perfectly still. Having seen many women tend to animals before, the king could not place what was different about her, all this deer. He had seen care. He had seen affection. This was something deeper. The maiden drew back just enough to look at the deer's face. She cradled his head between her palms, her thumbs brushing beneath his eyes, her forehead resting against his. "I thought they found you," she said, her voice quiet. The deer exhaled, slow and deep, as though answering her. This was not a pet. No, it could not be, not with the way she looked into the deer's eyes with more devotion and faith than he had seen in a lifetime. The maiden rose unsteadily to her feet, still holding the deer close. She rested her cheek against his neck, her eyes closed, and for a moment the king forgot himself. Distantly, he realized that he was holding his breath. He should turn away. He knew this. Kings were not meant to linger unseen, but his legs would not move.
She spoke to the deer softly. They were words too low for him to hear, meant only for the space between them. She brushed leaves from his flank and checked him for wounds with practiced care. Her hands moved with familiarity born of long years, yet it was not ownership. The deer nudged her gently, and she laughed. It was a small surprise sound, like how the sunlight broke through the canopy of dense trees. She leaned into him again, steady in herself, and the king saw then how tired she was. Inhaling slowly, the king stepped back. He did so quietly, deliberately, ensuring the forest overshadowed the sound of his retreat. He did not want to frighten her. He did not want to disturb what he had been allowed to see. As he turned away, he understood something with a clarity that startled him. If such a woman existed in the world, if she had survived long enough to kneel in the cold and still offer gentleness, then she was meant to be protected. And if fate had placed him close enough to witness her, then he would wait.
Chapter 8. The Truth. That day of the hunt, when Amalie guided her brother away from the clearing, she felt something there. Her hand rested against her brother's neck, and her fingers curled in the familiar place beneath the gold chain. Suddenly she saw a flash of grey. It was not close, but near enough to run from. A presence waited at the edge of the trees. She squinted for a single moment of time. For a second she saw a grey wolf half hidden among the shadows. Its coat was the colour of storm clouds, and its eyes were pale and steady. It did not bare its teeth. It did not advance. Amalie was already turning away with her brother. The moment was fleeting. Had it really been a wolf? Was there ever anything at all? She pondered these thoughts in her mind, but she could not shake the presence of the grey wolf. Confusion softened into something stranger as time stretched. She saw it standing as it was when she closed her eyes. The wolf did not hunger nor threaten. A tug would pull low in her chest. When she finally led her brother home, the image followed her evermore. Grey fur, pale eyes, stillness unlike any patience she had known. In the days that came after, the image continued to follow her. It followed her into her stepmother's house, where obedience was demanded, and mercy dangled like a cruel joke. Into the endless tasks, the worn hands, the bowed head. Into the nights where sleep came thin and restless. Even still, the presence of the wolf followed her into her fear. The hunt had changed something. She felt it more greatly now than ever before. It was an urgency she could no longer quiet. Erik had been too close to being taken from her forever. The forest was no longer enough, so she had to ask. She chose her words carefully, humbly, kneeling at the hearth where her stepmother sat with her wine. "Please," Amalie begged. "Erik has suffered long enough. Let him be turned back. I will work harder. I will serve you until the debt is repaid, even after the enchantment is dissolved." The stepmother laughed. "Oh, child," she said, setting her cup aside, "you still think this is about repayment." Amalie's stomach hollowed. "I will never turn him back," her stepmother spat, smiling thinly. "That form suits him. It is what you both deserve. And as long as you shall live, you will remain useful to me." A little shard fractured in Amalie's chest, splitting off and twisting deep inside. That night, as Amalie lay awake, the memory of the grey wolf returned to her with painful hope. She could not help but feel there was something there, meant for her discovery, but circling just beyond reach. Chapter 9. A Name. The king returned to the forest against his own counsel. He told himself it was a king's responsibility to understand the land he ruled. But no excuse could explain the pressure beneath his ribs, nor the way his chest ached as though he had left something vitally unfinished among the trees. Since the hunt, his sleep had been limited, and his thoughts were relentless. He saw her everywhere, kneeling in the cold, her hands gentle, her devotion absolute. He realized the moment he turned away that he would not be free of her. He dismissed his guard and went alone. He did not shift this time. He came as a man, though the wolf inside him paced restlessly. It was dusk when he saw her near a small stream. When she looked up, she was startled. Fear flared across her face, sharp and immediate. Instinctively, she moved toward the trees with one hand lifting as though to shield something behind her.
The king stopped short and raised his hands at once. "I mean no harm," he said. She did not lower her guard. "You followed us," she said, her voice kite. "Yes," he admitted, "but I should not have, but I could not stay away." The words escaped him before he could temper them. The moment they did, the world shifted. Her eyes widened with something that resembled recognition. The ache in the king's chest resolved into certainty so profound it nearly stole his breath. The forest dulled, every sound thinning until there was only her. His ears sharpened with the sound of her breath, uneven. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands and the way the cold air seemed to lean toward her. His pulse answered hers without permission, heat rushing low and urgent. It was not merely desire alone, but knowing. This was a recognition so sudden it bordered on pain. This was not pursuit. This was the divine certainty that whatever path had led him here had been bending toward her long before he had learned how to walk it. Leaving now would not free him. It would only tear and leave him bleeding behind his ribs. This was the truth he had been circling since the hunt. "I frightened you," he said quietly. "That was not my intent." "You're a hunter," she replied, her breath hitching short. "You do not understand." "No," the king said, "but I want to." She shook her head, panic threading through her composure. "You must leave this place. You must not return." The wolf inside him surged at the thought. "I cannot do that," he said, his voice earnest. Heavy silence stretched between them. "You are afraid for someone," the king continued softly. "Someone you protect." Her lips parted, and her eyes flicked once toward the trees behind her. "I can feel it. Your fear." She took a step back, shaken. "You do not know me." "No," he agreed. "Miss, what do they call you?" She hesitated. "It's none of your concern." The king frowned. "You shouldn't be out here all alone." "I'm not alone," she said quickly. "You speak of the deer," he realized aloud. His eyes flashed to the trees beyond the stream. She considered him, her watchful eyes squinting. "What do they call you?" The king chuckled. "You don't know who I am?" But she was not amused. She stared blankly, waiting for an answer. "My name is Leander," he said. She nodded once. "Very well, Mr. Leander." He pressed a hand to his chest. "Whatever you are guarding," he said, "whatever truth you are carrying alone, I will help you protect it." She swallowed, stepping back toward the trees. "Amalie," she said at last. "That is my name." She did not wait for an answer before she turned and fled, disappearing into the trees. The king did not follow. He stood there, long after she was gone, the forest still humming with sound in her absence. He knew with profound clarity that his heart had left with her. No matter what she feared, no matter what secret she kept, he was already hers.
Chapter 10. Hope. Amalie still could not unsee the grey wolf. He appeared the way certain thoughts did at the edge of her consciousness, gone when she turned too quickly. She felt this presence fleetingly. Sometimes it was a shape between tree trunks, or it was a breath that was not her own. She would hear a hush of leaves settling after something large had passed through them with care. Sometimes she wondered if she was imagining it. After all, the forest had always watched with teeth and eyes and memory. Still, she trusted it more than the house she returned to each evening with its narrow walls and narrower mercy. But the wolf returned, always at a distance. Sometimes she saw him when she walked the long path between the wood and the house, Erik trailing close behind her.
Her brother's steps were careful, and his ears flicked at every sound, but the wolf never frightened her brother. Erik would pause, lift his head, and huff softly through his nose. He was not alarmed, but he knew. When the wolf was near, Amalie's chest loosened. She slept better on those nights, and dreamed more vividly. In her dreams, there was always the man. It was not the wolf, though sometimes the line felt blurred. She dreamt of the man she had met near the stream. Leander, her mind would repeat. His voice returned to her in fragments, gentle and unhurried. She dreamed of speaking to him again. She would see herself standing close enough to notice the warmth of his breath in cold air. She dreamed of telling him things she had never said aloud. Each time she woke, the house was unchanged. Her stepmother's moods sharpened with the season. Her kindness, which had never been abundant, thinned to nothing. Amalie moved through her days carefully. She tiptoed as someone carrying a bowl filled to the brim, knowing even the smallest misstep would spill into punishment. One evening, stepmother's wrath finally spilled over. "You are late," she said coolly when Amalie returned, her eyes narrowing. Amalie lowered her gaze. "I was delayed." "By what?" the woman demanded. Silence stretched. The stepmother's mouth curved into a thin smile. "I see," she said. "You have yet to learn your lesson." Her stepmother's fingers brushed the gold chain at Erik's neck, tightening briefly until he stamped and snorted in distress. "Do not forget," she seethed through gritted teeth, leaning close to Amalie's ear. "Every kindness I grant you hangs by a thread." Amalie's hands shook. "I understand," she whispered. The blow was not meant to injure, but Amalie stumbled and caught her balance too late and fell against the rough edge of the work table. Pain flared along her arm. When she looked down, blood was already threading its way along her skin, dark and shocking against her pale garments. She did not cry out, for she had learned better than that. Then, the sound came from outside the house. It was low, violent, and unmistakable. Out came a growl so deep it seemed to rise from the forest floor. The windows rattled. Erik stamped, his breath coming fast. The stepmother froze. Again came the growl, closer now. A snarl sounded. She heard the scrape of claws against stone. It appeared in the doorway, filling it entirely with all grey muscle and bared teeth. When they turned to see the grey wolf, the stepmother screamed. He approached, and with every step he took forward, the stepmother retreated further into the house. She was worked into the corner, cowering in the face of manifested rage. Tripping on the edge of a wooden chair, the stepmother lost her balance. She scrambled to her feet and turned on her heel, bolting to the door. When she crossed the threshold, she ran. There was no dignity, no threats. The only thing that spoke was the naked terror on her face as she gathered skirts in her fists and fled down the road towards town, shouting for help that did not come. The wolf did not pursue her. He turned instead to Amalie. She sank to the floor, hyperventilating now that the danger had passed. Amalie cradled her injured against her chest. Relief flooded her so quickly it made her dizzy. The wolf was here. He had come to save her. "Thank you," she whispered, foolishly, to a creature who could not answer. The wolf stepped closer, then stopped. His eyes, she noticed dimly. They were not the flat gold of beasts. No, she had seen those eyes before. In an instant, everything shifted as he transformed. The change was not loud nor violent. She blinked, disbelieving. Where the wolf had stood, a man knelt. "Leander," she whispered. The name struck her. Something about her voice saying it aloud felt quiet and devastatingly inevitable. She stared at him. Her heart was hammering as understanding rearranged itself too quickly to keep up. "It was you, all along," she breathed. "You were the grey wolf." He did not deny it. Instead, he reached for her, but he stopped just short of touching her arm.
I could not stay away, he said. His voice was rough and absent from restraint. Every instinct I have led me back to you. Her fear returned all at once. Her pupils dilated, turning glossy. She will come back, Amalie said, and when she does, things will be worse than ever before. She won't touch you again, he interrupted, and there was something terrible and tender in the promise. Not while I draw breath. She shook her head. You don't understand her. You don't understand what she does when she believes something belongs to her. Leander rose slowly to his feet, as though sudden movement might frighten her. In his human form, he seemed almost unbearably real. He was too solid, too present for something that had once been a wolf's shadow. I understand more than you think, he said. I have watched you bleed at her hands. I have watched you bow your head to survive. Her throat tightened. My heart will not allow me to leave you here, he continued. Please, Amalie, I can take care of you. You can live a happy life. I will give you anything your heart desires. Let me save you from this wickedness.
She closed her eyes. This is not about me. I know, he said, quietly. Waiting. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. My brother, she said. The word cracked open in her chest. He is not safe. I will not trade his life for my own, not for comfort, not for anything. He searched her face, trying to understand. Then hear me, he said. I am not asking you to abandon him. I am asking you to bring him with you. Amalie stared at him. You cannot mean that. His mouth was firm with determination. I have watched him too. I have felt the wrongness of the curse that binds him. Her face contorted with feelings that could not be expressed in words. She was staring up at Leander, earnest, desperate, hoping for answers. You know about the enchantment? She managed to say, her voice small. I know enough, he replied. Where I come from, I am king of a small nation. Within my palace, there are those who practice magic that can undo the evil she has cast. He took a step closer, and she did not retreat. She looked longingly into his eyes, feeling a spark that whispered of a better future. What if their magic fails? Amalie asked. Then he will still be safe at the very least for all his days with you, Leander said, nodding to the strong deer that stood protectively beside the fair maiden. He will be fed and sheltered, untouched by that wicked witch. You will never have to know fear again. Tears spilled down Amalie's cheeks freely now. You speak as though you love me. He did not hesitate. I do. The bond you feel is not fascination, Amalie, he assured. Where my people come from, there are mates. Their love surpasses reason and time. She stared in utter disbelief. He lowered himself before her. Amalie, you are my mate. The king was kneeling, bowing his head just enough that she could see the truth shimmering in his eyes. Come with me, he said. Bring your brother. I will make room for anything you desire, and I will never stop until you have found peace. Just be my wife. Her heart thundered. Every instinct she had been taught from her volatile childhood screamed for her to act with caution. Though, beneath it, there was an older, quieter voice. It whispered with the same certainty she felt when the wolf had stood between her and harm. If I come, she said, it is for Erik first. Leander looked up at her, eyes fierce and gentle all at once. Then we are agreed, he said. His safety is bound to yours, and from this moment on, yours is bound to mine. She knew then it was the right choice to follow him. By dawn the castle gates stood open.
The forest watched as the young maiden and the strong deer sauntered toward a fate still undecided. Chapter 11. Time passed, and pain turned to something distant. The castle had become quiet in the way only great places ever did. It was far from empty, but the halls hushed with anticipation. The kingdom would soon announce a royal union. Amalie sat at the edge of the bed assigned to her brother, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Moonlight spilled in through the tall window, pale and silver, tracing the elegant curve of Erik's antlers as he lay resting on the thick woven rug beside the hearth.
"I wish you could stand beside me tomorrow," she said, "as you should be, beside me. I wish I could hear your voice." Erik rose and crossed the room with quiet hooves, lowering his head until his brow pressed against her shoulder. She leaned into him, breathing him in. He smelled of the forest they had left behind long ago, and of familiar warmth braided together. "It has been a year," she whispered, "and still—" Her voice trailed off. "I fear I'm asking too much of you." He exhaled softly, a sound like wind through leaves. She smiled faintly. "You always were the braver one." When at last she rose to leave, she kissed the soft fur between his eyes, lingering longer with silent hope. "Good night, my dear brother," she said. "Tomorrow will be beautiful, I promise." The corridor beyond her chamber was dim, lit only by torches set deep into the stone. She moved quietly. She was barefoot, feeling the cold stone beneath her, and her nightgown whispering around her ankles. The castle no longer frightened her. It had become a place of safety, filled with watchful kindness. She closed the door behind her and turned toward her own room. Getting ready to sleep, she paused at her bedside. Footsteps echoed down the hall. They were slow, measured. Her blood went cold. She knew that rhythm. She had known it since childhood. The deliberate pace was unlike any other cadence. "You really thought," came the voice from the shadows, sharp with pleasure, "that you could disappear?" Amalie's breathing stopped. Her body refused to move. Her stepmother stepped into the torchlight, her face drawn and angular, eyes bright with something feral. A thin chain glinted at her throat, its charm pulsing faintly. "I heard about the wedding," the woman continued, circling slowly. "Did you think I wouldn't learn of the foolish king playing hero with a little girl who thinks she has been saved?" She laughed. "Saved?" Amalie backed toward the door, heart pounding. "Leave," she said, though her voice trembled. "You do not belong here." "I belong wherever you are," she hissed. "You have yet to pay for your debts." Then steel flashed. It glittered in the light of her bedside candle. Before Amalie could realize what was happening, the wicked woman lunged forward. The knife came fast. Amalie flinched, screaming as pain bloomed along the inside of her arm. It was blinding. She fell, scrambling over the stone floor. Its coldness bit into her knees as she cried out again. She screamed for her brother. She screamed loudly, her lungs exploding with every fear in the hopes that all those who dwelled among the castle would wake and run to her. Most of all, she screamed for her betrothed. "Leander!" she cried. In response, the castle erupted. A roar split through the dark light. It was deep and thunderous. The wolf came like a storm. Leander slammed into the corridor in a blur of fur and fury, his teeth bared, flashing white against nearly red gums. His eyes blazed silver. Rushing forward, he rammed the witch with devastating force. The impact sent her crashing into the wall behind. The cruel stepmother shrieked. Uselessly, she clawed at the grey wolf, chanting through bloodied lips. All the while, the mysterious chain at her throat burned bright.
As they continued to struggle in a sea of mangled limbs, the chain suddenly snapped. It made a cracking sound, and the charm fell to the stone floor, shattering against it like glass breaking.
Smoke rushed outward, wafting through the room. Her stepmother rushed to the floor where the charm had shattered. She grasped at the broken pieces. Her eyes were wide. "No," she said. "No, it can't be." Then, in the chamber across the hall, Erik huffed and groaned. Amalie rushed to him, panic still flooding her heart. She did not stop to care for the blood rushing down her arm. When she arrived, she saw him turning about in the middle of the room, his body twisted, bones reshaping. Soon, his fur smoothed over to skin as the curse shattered with the broken charm. Erik collapsed to the floor, gasping. He was human, Amalie realized. His footsteps sounded light and frantic. He was running. "Amalie," Erik shouted. She inclined her head to Erik, human now. He was standing over her in the doorway. His hair was dark and dishevelled, but his eyes were wide with wistful nostalgia. Amalie did not breathe. The two siblings collided, holding each other, laughing and crying all at once. "You're back," she said, something akin to wonder filling her voice. "You're you again." He laughed shakily. "So I am." The guards arrived moments later, wielding steel and ready to face fury. With haste, the witch was seized. She was bound using iron cuffs before the guards dragged her away as she continued screaming curses that no longer held power. When silence fell at last, Amalie turned from her brother to find the king standing close behind. His wolf form had faded. Tears were ever streaming down her face as she was embraced dearly in Leander's arms. Understanding crept over the king, and he pressed his forehead to hers. "It is over," he said. "She cannot harm either of you ever again." She sobbed against him, clutching him tight. "Thank you," she said, repeating it over again. "Thank you for saving us."
The wedding was postponed by only a day. Amalie slept for nearly a full turning of the sun, her body finally letting go of the vigilance it had carried for so long. When she woke, there was nothing to fear. Leander was waiting for her. Erik was safe, sleeping soundly in the chamber across the hall. He was breathing even, human again. She could feel them in her heart, and for once her heart felt peace. For the first time since childhood, Amalie felt no urgency. When the morning of the wedding came, the kingdom gathered beneath pale winter light. Bells rang softly, singing of joyful welcome. Amalie walked toward the king with steady steps, her brother close beside her. Erik smiled at her, pride and adoration written plainly on his doting face. She knew then that this joy was not borrowed, it was not conditional. When Leander took her hands, the noise of the castle seemed to fall away. He held her with certainty, his hands resting in the familiar crux of her own palms. "I choose you," she said. Her voice did not waver. "I will choose you in this lifetime and every lifetime after this. You have shown me what it means to keep a promise." His eyes softened the more he stared into her own. "Amalie, my heart, I have long known you were mine, and I yours even longer before," he said quietly. "But more than that, I know that I cannot rule this kingdom without you, as my partner and equal. You show me new bounds of loving kindness and faithfulness every day." They gazed at one another, listening to the officiant continue speaking. When the final words were spoken, Leander leaned close, resting his forehead against hers. "Amalie," he whispered, relishing in the way her name tasted on his tongue. "My love, my soul, my wife." He breathed her in, slow and reverent, committing the moment forever to his memory. His nose touched hers, their eyes closed, and his lips brushed against hers until he finally kissed her. There was no hurry. He savoured her touch and kissed her like the promises he kept.
Amalie found her hands curling into the front of his coat. She felt warm and safe as the fight within her finally came to rest. The kingdom cheered, the bells rang louder, and somewhere beyond the stone walls, the forest eased. For the first time in her life, Amalie believed it would remain so.